Shall we move on to the third barrier you've identified, which is too much bureaucracy? Why would that deter potential volunteers?
Well, bureaucracy means what it means. Paperwork, forms to fill in, questions to answer, and it means delays, I think. And the voluntary sector has had a reputation for being bureaucracy-free, or bureaucracy-light, at least. I'm beginning to think it's losing that. I think a lot of volunteers out there imagine that compared with the statutory sector, or compared with the business world, the voluntary sector is sort of free of paperwork and these bureaucratic demands. But not entirely, it can't be. There are some realistic demands that are made on voluntary groups. So for instance, if you joined a long-established charity that was a registered charity, there was maybe a limited liability company, well, there are lots of forms to fill in, lots of annual accounts and reports that need to be provided. So these are realities that the sector has to deal with. They can try to minimise those demands, and the demands won't always reach the volunteers, but groups will often have a degree of bureaucracy they've got to deal with. I often think that volunteers are sort of divided into two groups. They're the marchers, the methodical, scrupulous, driven volunteers who like to do things by the book. They can often cope with bureaucracy. There are other volunteers, I call them dancing volunteers, who improvise, they're spontaneous, they're playful. It's not that one type of volunteer is better than another, but I think that you need to know what sort of person you are and where you're going to fit in. Because there are sorts of voluntary activities out there that don't involve a lot of bureaucracy. So I would think that if you're getting involved with a local campaign to make sure that the trees by your rowing are not being pulled down, that might be a short-lived campaign. You're not going to be hidebound by bureaucracy if you do that. But there are a lot of other long-established agencies and maybe advice agencies who have to do things by the book. So think about the sort of person you are and where you might best fit in.
Okay, so one size does not fit all.
Absolutely, there are dozens of sizes in the voluntary sector. I think there are all sorts of volunteers, there's all sorts of volunteering roles and all sorts of voluntary organisations, and I think it's sort of very difficult to make generalisations about the voluntary sector with that in mind. I think almost anybody could find a useful place in the voluntary sector, but people often don't know, the volunteers, new volunteers, don't know what the options are. Not all the new volunteers come through the volunteer centre, which you might be able to advise. And the organisations often who say, no, you don't quite fit our profile, they don't know what the other options are elsewhere. So there is a better clearinghouse function needs to be done, I think.